I think a lot of what Israel wants probably aligns with what the U.S. was going to do anyways. I don't think Biden was ever going to leave Syria, I,
Oh yeah.
regardless of what Israel wanted or not. Um, but there's an interesting statement made by the Iranians that I thought was pretty important to point out, and something that I've been yelling about on this show for, I don't know, 8 months now. And that is the Iranians say that, hey, it seems like the Biden policy is awful similar to the Trump policy. And that's a real issue for them because, Trump undid what Obama had done to, build some diplomacy with Iran. And now if Biden is continuing down the Trump path, that means that this is a path towards conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. So Ayatollah Ali Khamenei said on Saturday, let's see, I've got the quotes. He says, America's current administration is no different from the previous one because what it demands from Iran on the nuclear issue is different in words, but the same thing that Trump demanded. Comedy said this is from his official website. The Americans truly have no shame on the nuclear issue, and even though they withdrew from the JCPOA, they now talk in a way and make demands as if it were Iran that withdrew. And he also says, let's see, behind the scenes of America's foreign policy, there is a predator wolf that sometimes changes to a cunning fox. And I think, I mean, the Ayatollah has been saying, we've been hearing, quotes from him for a few weeks now about, as Raisi comes in and sort of forms his new government, he's framed as being this hardliner, and the sort of the rhetoric from the think tank, the anti-Iranian hardliners here in this country, and also the Israelis as well, is the idea that you can't negotiate with this guy. He's a hardliner, he executed all these MEK people at the end of the Iran-Iraq war. He was involved in those commissions when he was a judge.
Which is
And
kind of ironic here because I learned this week that Naftali Bennett was involved in the Quantum massacre, the first one. He was actually a commander that I don't know like how involved he was in like picking the actual target, but he did, say that his troops were under fire and they needed support. That led to the that I think a UN shelter being shelled and 100 plus, mostly kids being killed, and this being the kind of thing that radicalized, I believe, some of the 9/11 hijackers. And so,
for sure.
just to point out that Rossi might not be a good guy, but people talked about Trump sitting down with killers. I don't know if Putin has killed as many people as Naftali Bennett, and he certainly hasn't said that he enjoys killing Arabs, and Bennett has. So
Yeah.
that's quite a terrible figure that Biden sat down with. But go ahead, Connor.
No, absolutely. And again, I mean, I read a piece from Moon of Alabama about that, and about the what they're saying about Rossi and his, what do they call them, death commissions or something like that. And it sounds like the majority. Okay, I'm not defending the guy, but the majority of the people apparently who were killed in these things. This is at the. I thought there was something weird about that because, the time matches up with the tail end of the Iran-Iraq war, where the U.S. was, backing Israel, backing Iran, and also, Israel, who was covertly backing Iran, and then America, of course, and their Gulf allies were, arming and supporting Iraq. And they were launching chemical weapons attacks with satellite information and, assistance from the U.S. intelligence. I mean, chemical weapons attacks that killed tens of thousands of Iranian conscripts, and so 500,000 people died on both sides of that war. So, and the MEK, of course, were launching attacks against Iran during that war from Iraq. So, I mean, what happened essentially was that it sounds like there was some sort of a campaign where the MEK went into Iran and started attacking at the end of the war, and a lot of these people were rounded up, and I think they basically, a lot of them were killed. But again, this is in the middle of again, this is a result largely, you could say, of U.S. foreign policy, and also, I mean, yeah. So it's just it's more nuanced, I would say, than bombing a UN shelter full of women and children in the
And
middle of your war on southern, in Lebanon, southern
I
Lebanon.
And I mean, if that's what we're talking about here, we had to remember that after the Islamic State, was defeated in Iraq, they were at sentencing women who were, married to allegedly married to Islamic State fighters in groups of like 15 or 20 to death. I'm not sure how many of those people got executed, but they were being sentenced to death in these like mass trial situations, and so, I mean, the U.S. was backing that government and absolutely okay with it. Not that that makes it right. It just makes it something that it isn't a uniquely one-time event that we should be outraged about it, and we can't deal with this because obviously we can and do all the time.
Exactly, and so they're using this as against Rossi, and they're saying that oh, you can't trust him. He can't be reasoned with is kind of what they usually say about what the hardliners. They don't treat the moderates any better. Usually, I mean, we saw what happened here with Rouhani. I think he said his quote on the way out was that the Americans essentially stole the opportunity from my government to essentially give Iran the people the benefits of normalizing relations with the West. And I'm paraphrasing, but yeah. So I mean, they're kind of selling this as he's just the worst, and you can't talk to him. And so we're now seeing, the Biden administration saying that. Well, but actually, what we find out is that they're the ones who are saying you have to put a sentence now. You can't. The whole thing was if the U.S. lifts sanctions, the Iranians would return to their compliance with the deal. The Iranians never left the deal. Under Articles 26 and 36, they're well within their rights to do the things they're doing, even enriching uranium to 60%. It's legal at least under the safeguards agreement, and it's under the supervision of the IAEA, as well as they're not violating the non-proliferation treaty. 60%, they don't really have any use for that. They most likely dilute it back to usable level after that, after they make the point. But yeah, I mean, the Americans are the ones who are putting in all the. Basically, they're saying if you don't, and we saw this coming really in the reporting as Biden was coming into office. We were talking about it on the show, and we were hearing comments from Sullivan about how regional activities and ballistic missiles have to be on the table for Reed Zakaria. They just do. And, and it's just like, I mean, it was being reported by, I think, even Scott Ritter at the time that Blinken was saying things like that they were inserting all kinds of poison pills that were going to make it nearly impossible for a return to the deal. And we come to find out the Ayatollah has been saying that, yeah, they're trying to insert this sentence that says, if we return to the deal, you have to basically submit to negotiating on these other issues, and if you don't, we can then just say that you violated the deal and then put the sanctions back on. And of course they won't even offer the verification mechanism to guarantee sanctions relief, and they won't provide a guarantee, not necessarily that they can, but that they won't guarantee that they won't leave the deal again like Trump did. And so, of course, the Iranians are in a very difficult position dealing with a dishonest actor like the Americans here. So then also, the Iranians came out, the Secretary General of the National Security Council, and said after Biden said that stuff about, there are other options we will pursue if diplomacy fails. And he said the emphasis on using other options against Iran amounts to threatening another country illegally and establishes Iran's right to reciprocate against so-called available options. And yeah, so we've seen also just in leading up to these meetings with Bennett, we've been getting quotes from, Aviv Kohavi, the hawkish chief of staff of the IDF, saying to reporters that they're speeding up operational plans against Iran. He says that the new military budget, which is bigger, has funds to expand capabilities against Iran. Benny Gantz issued a similar threat, saying the state of Israel has means to act and will not hesitate to do so. I do not rule out the possibility that Israel will have to take action in the future in order to prevent a nuclear Iran. And he also says he's sort of trying to box Biden in. Gantz is saying to the media, according to the Times of Israel, the United States and Israel share intelligence information and the cooperation with the United States in this field, and it is only getting stronger. We are working with them in order to establish a plan B to demonstrate that if there is no deal, other activities will begin, as President Biden said. And that's what Gantz said. So it seems to me like they're trying to sort of, at least on some level, push the Americans into kind of like where, well, you said this, and I could see the Republicans making use of that. We saw even during the slaughter in Gaza in May, Rubio going to he sent a letter to the White House demanding just and no sanctions relief and no more talks with Iran, even these indirect talks that were going on in Vienna. Using this attack on Gaza, a concentration camp, people who are under blockade, as a way to thwart talks with Iran. That's what Marco Rubio, how he exploited that situation.
Right. So, Connor, is there anything else going on with the possibility of TOTS here? Any potential good news that you have for us that, hey, maybe TOTS will get restarted here, the Indrad TOTS? I know it's going to be an uphill battle for a ton of reasons if they do get restarted, but is there any plans or hopes that they might in the coming days or weeks?
Well, I sincerely hope so. I don't really have any good news on that front. It seems to me like, the French, and I will say this, the French and the Germans are saying to the Iranians, you should come back and do talks right now. Although what's interesting is, the Iranians made huge concessions even to do these indirect talks because there was no sanctions relief, which means that Trump launched the maximum pressure campaign and essentially said, you better talk with us. We're not lifting sanctions until you do. And they thought they would wait it out until Biden came into office because surely he'd be more reasonable. But ultimately, they conceded to those terms basically and came to the negotiation table without any sanctions relief or any concessions. In fact, Biden added sanctions. But I will say this: the Germans and the French are saying you need to come back to the negotiating table. Although I believe it's the new foreign minister who said, "All right, look, everybody knows this. It takes like 2 to 3 months for us to get our thing together. It takes for a new administration to sort of get settled." And then they made a comment. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, the foreign minister said, "We are not seeking to flee the negotiation table, and the government considers a real negotiation as a negotiation that produces palpable results, allowing the rights of the Iranian nation to be guaranteed." And this is Amir Abdollahian, the new foreign minister. And the foreign ministry of Germany said they're vehemently urging Iran to resume talks, and the French foreign minister said he's urging an immediate resumption of negotiations. As far as that, I'll just say that the French, the Germans, and the British issued a joint statement a little while ago, back last month, basically saying they're gravely concerned about, what they think amounts to serious violations of the deal on the part of Iran. But Jason Ditz at antiwar.com debunked all this. They're basically talking about they configured 2 new centrifuge cascades at the Natanz facility to produce or to enrich uranium hexafluoride to 60%. But I already explained that's essentially that's basically a negotiating tactic. It was pushed by the Iranian parliament after the Israelis attacked the Natanz nuclear facility at the start of the Vienna talks back in April. And then also they're accusing them of, just like the Americans, Ned Price is coming out and going, they have no use for uranium metal. And they're saying, you see these reports where even the IAEA is kind of, as Jason says, they kind of cause these sort of controversies because they put out these reports that are treated with such alarmism when these are things that Iran already announced and is already doing under IAEA supervision. But they're just saying that the fact that they're taking uranium and enriching it to 20% to make those it's uranium tetrafluoride that they enrich to 20% enriched uranium, and then they convert those into fuel plates for the Tehran Medical Research Reactor, which is a U.S. built reactor that the Americans built back when the Shah, the American puppet dictator, was ruling Iran. And the reason they're doing that is because they're supposed to be able to get fuel from other states, but since Trump left the deal and reimposed sanctions, they've made it impossible for them to do that. In fact, that reactor is outmoded. They wanted to replace it with a new heavy water reactor design, but again, the sanctions are making that nearly impossible. So it's just interesting that you see kind of the Europeans not really pressing the U.S. to come back to their commitments, but hyping up the threat of the Iranian nuclear program. So I don't know. I mean, you see, I will say this on the regional front, some things look good because Iran and Saudi are talking to each other now again. So it seems like they're in they're getting ready to do a fourth round of talks. So since April, they've had like sort of 3 negotiations, I believe, in maybe it's not in Baghdad. It's being done through Iraq. So yeah, Dave DeCamp reported on this at antiwar.com the other day. So the ambassador in Iraq, Iran's ambassador, said we have had 3 rounds of negotiations with the Saudi side, and the 4th round is to be held after the formation of a new Iranian government. And Dave says that starting in April, they've been holding the negotiations in Baghdad that have been on hold as Raisi's creating the new government. And he also talks about, of course, Soleimani was assassinated in that U.S. drone strike at the beginning of 2020 during the Trump administration, that we nearly went to war with Iran if they hadn't have been so restrained, the Iranians, that is. But he was on a diplomatic mission, actually, I believe meeting with the former prime minister of Iraq, who was facilitating talks, as Dave says here, between Saudi Arabia and Iran. So, but the Saudis seem to be concerned. That's actually a good thing, that them actually realizing that if it does look like the U.S. is removing some troops from the region, and as he says here, the Patriot anti-missile batteries out of Saudi and other Gulf states, that they should. It makes sense if they can't rely on the U.S. to do their fighting for them, and to be the hegemon here. Then they should actually have some talks with their longtime rival and try and figure something out. But throwing a monkey wrench into that, you have the Israelis in the media now. They're suggesting, and you've been seeing a lot of this from people like Elliot Abrams in the press as well. Philip Weiss was talking about this in one of his articles. The talk now is that Israel should form some sort of like a Middle East kind of anti-Iran NATO equivalent with the Gulf states, as they say, as the Israelis say, the reasonable Arab nations, to counter Iranian domination and aggression. So they're looking at, let's see. So Bennett is, they're saying let's see. A reporter with Israel's public broadcaster Khan said Bennett's idea would form a military alliance between Israel, Jordan, and the Gulf states to confront Iran. This would include the installation of radars and warning devices to counter any threat from Iran. And that's a quote from the report. And this is, again, Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com, Israeli media. But yeah, Bennett suggested NATO-style alliance against Iran. So I think they're trying to combat that. In fact, Raisi said one of his priorities coming in as the new president was to mend relations with the Gulf states. And we're also seeing that that's a priority of Bennett, is to deepen cooperation with the Gulf states. And the infrastructure is kind of already in place if you look at the Abraham Accords. I know Dave DeCamp has said that as the U.S. gradually focuses more on great power competition and starts to really move ahead on the Asia pivot, they seem to be wanting something like that, where you can have sort of a regional ally take more responsibility and have a situation like the Abraham Accords, where they can just sort of U.S. proxies kind of do their work for them. But it's that's a slow process, and I don't know how exactly that would all work out. I think it would be obviously not a good idea, but of course, Israel relies so much on U.S. aid for and diplomatic and political cover. And just the substantial, they're the biggest recipient of foreign military aid. So it's like, the idea that they're taking we'll shoulder some more responsibility. It's still all, I don't see us leaving the region anytime soon. And I think it's still going to be, this is all on our dime essentially. And so I don't know. To answer your question, I don't know if I see any silver lining here yet.